Imagine a time long before cities, before farms, before writing, a time when our own distant ancestors were not the masters of the planet, but just another struggling creature on the vast African savanna. They were small, not very fast, and certainly not the strongest animals around. But some of them started to do something new, something that would change everything. They started to think with their hands. They picked up a rock, and with another rock, they shaped it. They made the first tools. This is the story of that creature. This is the story of Homo habilis, the handyman. The story begins, as so many stories in human evolution do, in a hot, dry place in Tanzania. Olduvai Gorge. It's a deep ravine that cuts through the earth, exposing layers of rock and time. For decades, a husband and wife team of paleoanthropologists, Lewis and Mary Leakey, had been searching there. They were looking for the origins of humanity. They had found ancient animal bones. They had found crude stone tools, hundreds of thousands of them, but the maker of these tools remained a ghost. The tools were there, but who made them? The local Australopithecines, like the famous Lucy, didn't seem to have the brain power or the hand structure for it. The Leakeys were convinced someone else had been there, someone more advanced. In 1960, their son Jonathan found something remarkable. It was a piece of a jawbone with teeth, parts of a skull, and most importantly, some small hand bones. The collection of fossils was officially named Olduvai Hominid 7, or OH7. It was the skeleton of a young individual. Louis Leakey studied the bones intensely. The skull fragments, though incomplete, suggested a brain larger than any known Australopithecine. The teeth were smaller and more human-like, and the hand bones were the key. They showed a thumb that was broader and more mobile than an ape's. This hand could have made a precision grip, the kind you need to hold a tool firmly and use it with control. This was it. This was the toolmaker. Louis Leakey and his colleagues felt this was something entirely new. It wasn't just an advanced ape man, it was the first true human. It was the dawn of our own genus, Homo. They needed a name for this new species. Given the massive number of stone tools found right alongside the fossils, the choice seemed obvious. They called it Homo habilis. In Latin, that means handyman or skilled man. The name stuck. It perfectly captured the single most important thing about this creature. It was the hominin that made things. So what were these things? What were these revolutionary first tools? They weren't elegant spears or finely crafted arrowheads. If you found one today, you might not even recognize it as a tool. They belonged to a technology now called the Oldowan industry, named after Olduvai Gorge. The primary tool was a chopper. A toolmaker would take a round, fist-sized rock, a cobble, and strike it hard with another rock, the hammerstone. A few sharp blows would knock off several flakes, leaving a jagged, sharp edge on the original core. That was it. Simple, but incredibly effective. This act, this deliberate shaping of an object to serve a purpose, was a monumental leap. No animal had ever done this before in such a systematic way. A chimpanzee might use a rock to smash a nut, but it doesn't modify the rock first to make it a better nut smasher. Homo habilis looked at a stone and saw the potential for a blade inside it. This required foresight, planning, and a complex sequence of actions. It was the birth of technology. The tools themselves were a prehistoric multi-tool. The sharp edge of the chopper could be used to slice through animal hide, which is incredibly tough. It could scrape meat off bones. The flakes that were knocked off were not just waste. They were small, razor-sharp blades, perfect for finer cutting tasks, and the blunt, heavy end of the chopper was a hammer, ideal for one of the most important jobs, smashing open long bones. Why was that so important? Because inside the bones of large animals is marrow. Marrow is a dense, fatty, high-calorie food. It's like a prehistoric energy bar. But getting to it is hard. Most predators can't. Hyenas can crush bones with their powerful jaws, but few other animals can. The Homo habilis, with its simple chopper, could get access to a food source that was off limits to almost everyone else. This was their secret weapon. They weren't hunting mammoths, they were most likely scavengers. Imagine a group of them, small and vulnerable, waiting for a lion to finish its meal. When the great cat moved off, they would rush in. They couldn't compete for the prime muscle meat, but with their stone tools, they could quickly cut off leftover scraps, and more importantly, carry away the leg bones. Back in a safer place, they could smash them open and feast on the rich marrow inside. This was a game changer. It provided the protein and fat needed to fuel a growing brain. And the brain of Homo habilis was growing. This was the other major reason it was placed in our genus. Its brain size was, on average, around 610 cubic centimeters. This might not sound like much compared to our modern brains, which are around 1350 cubic centimeters, but it was a significant jump. The Australopithecines like Lucy had brains around 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, not much bigger than a modern chimpanzee's. The Homo habilis had crossed a critical threshold. Some scientists called this the cerebral Rubicon, an arbitrary line set at 600 cubic centimeters. If your brain was bigger than that, you were in the club. You were Homo. This bigger brain came with a different skull shape. The face of habilis was less projecting, or prognathic, than its ancestors. The jaw was smaller, and the teeth, especially the big grinding molars, were shrinking. This makes perfect sense. If you are using tools to cut up your food before you eat it, you don't need such a powerful chewing apparatus. This technology was changing their very bodies. They were outsourcing the work of their jaws to the tools in their hands. But if you looked at the rest of its body, Homo habilis was still very primitive. It was not a miniature modern human. It was a creature of two worlds, part ape, part human. It was short, maybe only 3.5 to 4.5 feet tall. It had long arms, much like an ape's, and relatively short legs. This body plan suggests that while it walked on two legs on the ground, it was still very comfortable in the trees. The trees were probably a safe place to sleep and to escape from the many predators of the savannah like saber-toothed cats and giant hyenas. Its hands were ready for tool making, but its long, curved finger bones also hint at a powerful climbing grip. Its feet were mostly modern, with an arch that supported bipedal walking, but some features suggested more flexibility than our own, perhaps also for climbing. It was a mosaic creature, a transitional form caught in the act of becoming something new. The discovery of Homo habilis was not without controversy. In fact, it ignited a fierce debate in the scientific community. Some researchers looked at the primitive, ape-like body and said it didn't belong in our genus. They argued it was just a smart Australopithecine. They pointed to its small stature and long arms as evidence. The cerebral Rubicon was just an arbitrary line, they said. For them, Homo should be reserved for creatures that were much more like us. The debate got even more complicated with new fossil finds. At a site called Kubifora in Kenya, Richard Leakey, the son of Louis and Mary, discovered another famous skull. This one, KNMER 1470, had a much larger brain case, around 775 cubic centimeters. But it had a surprisingly large and flat face. Was this a male Homo habilis, showing a large degree of size difference between the sexes? Or was it an entirely different species? Today, many scientists place this skull into its own species, Homo rudolfensis. This suggests that the dawn of our genus was not a single straight line. It was a messy experimental time. There wasn't just one kind of early Homo running around, there were at least two, and maybe more, coexisting on the same landscape. They weren't alone out there either. At the same time and in the same places as Homo habilis, there lived another type of hominin. This was Paranthropus boisei, famously nicknamed Nutcracker Man. Paranthropus was on a completely different evolutionary path. It had a massive dish-shaped face, a bony crest on top of its skull to anchor enormous chewing muscles, and molars the size of thumbnails. Its strategy for survival was to evolve the biological equipment to eat tough, fibrous plant foods that no one else could. Where Homo habilis took a different route. Instead of evolving bigger teeth to process food, it evolved a bigger brain to make tools to process food. It was a competition between biology and technology, between brute force and ingenuity. In the long run, we know which strategy won. Paranthropus eventually went extinct. The path of the toolmaker, the handyman, led onward. So, what was life like for Homo habilis? We have to piece it together from clues. They likely lived in small social groups, much like modern chimpanzees or hunter-gatherers. And cooperation would have been essential for survival. A single habilis would have been easy prey. A group could work together to spot predators, defend themselves, and secure food. They didn't have permanent homes. They were nomads, moving across the landscape, following resources. Archaeologists have found sites that seem to have been home bases or favorite spots. These are areas with a high concentration of stone tools and animal bones, often near a river or stream. These might have been places where they brought scavenged carcasses to be safely butchered and shared. The sharing of food is a deeply human behavior, and it may have its roots here. It builds social bonds and ensures everyone gets something to eat, even if they weren't successful on a particular day. Communication would have been vital. Could they speak? Almost certainly not in the way we do. The shape of their vocal tract and the organization of their brain were not yet ready for complex language. But they would have had a rich system of gestures, body language, and vocal calls, more complex than any living ape. They had to be able to communicate ideas like danger, food over here, or help me with this. The very act of teaching another individual how to make a stone tool requires a level of communication and social learning that marks a major step forward. The world they lived in was dynamic and dangerous. The climate in Africa was changing. The dense forests were shrinking and the open grasslands or savannas were expanding. This new environment offered opportunities like herds of grazing animals, but also new risks like exposure to predators. Homo habilis was a product of this changing world. Its tool use and flexible diet allowed it to adapt and thrive in this shifting landscape in a way that more specialized animals could not. This brings us to a fundamental question. Why? Why did the brain of this particular primate start to grow? Why did it start making tools? There's likely no single answer. It was probably a feedback loop. A slightly bigger brain allows for better problem solving, like figuring out how to make a simple tool. Using that tool gives you access to better food, like meat and marrow. That high quality food provides the energy and nutrients needed to support an even bigger, more energy hungry brain. A bigger brain can then make even better tools, which gets you even better food, and so on. Technology and biology pushed each other forward in a spiral of increasing complexity. Social life was also part of this loop. Living in a more complex social group requires more brain power to keep track of relationships, alliances, and rivals. This is known as the social brain hypothesis. The challenges of group living may have been a primary driver for a larger, more capable mind. For about 500,000 years, Homo habilis persisted. They were a successful and important species. They established the blueprint for our genus, a reliance on tools, a varied diet, and a big brain. But evolution never stands still. The world continued to change, and so did the hominins. Around 1.9 million years ago, a new, more advanced hominin appeared on the scene. This was Homo erectus. Homo erectus was different. It was taller, with a body built for long-distance walking and running. Its legs were long and its arms were short. It had a fully modern body plan. Its brain was significantly larger than habilis, starting around 800 cubic centimeters and growing over time. And it made better tools. The simple old Owen choppers were replaced by the Acheulean industry, characterized by large, symmetrical, teardrop-shaped hand axes. This was a much more sophisticated tool, requiring more skill and planning to create. What happened to Homo habilis? They didn't just vanish. It seems most likely that they were the direct ancestors of Homo erectus. Over thousands of generations, some populations of habilis gradually evolved, becoming taller, bigger-brained, and more adept at life on the open savanna. They didn't get wiped out, they transformed. They were a crucial link in the chain, a bridge between the ape-like Australopithecines and the more recognizably human forms that came after. The legacy of Homo habilis is profound. They were not mighty hunters or great artists. They didn't control fire or build shelters, but they were the first to systematically use technology to overcome their physical limitations. They proved that you didn't need giant teeth or powerful claws to survive. You could survive with a clever mind and a skilled hand. The idea of solving problems with technology, is the single most defining characteristic of our lineage. Everything we have today, our computers, our skyscrapers, our spaceships, is a direct descendant of the simple idea that occurred to a small hominin on the African savanna. If you hit one rock with another in just the right way, you can make a tool that will change your world. When we look at the fossilized remains of Homo habilis, we are looking at a deep and distant reflection of ourselves. We see a creature struggling to survive in a difficult world, using its wits to get by. We see the dawn of ingenuity. We see the very first time one of our ancestors decided not just to find food, but to make the tool to get the food. The handyman was more than just a name for a species. It was a description of a new way of life, a new strategy that would ultimately lead, after 2 million more years of twists and turns, to us. They were the pioneers, the first chapter in the story of what it means to be human. And it all started with a rock, a good idea, and a handy pair of hands.